I'm aware that we're not suddenly booming, but it was good news that we didn't see a contraction in the economy in November of last year.
Yeah, I'm not convinced. I think there was a bit of a lull because of the Queen's funeral. There was a bit of a bounce because of Christmas, the World Cup, for example. But the figures are now showing that Christmas, there wasn't quite the bounce people were looking for and expected. So we might see a lot of companies that were depending on Christmas to hit their sales figures for the year, struggling coming into the new year. So I think that we need to buckle up, including the Prime Minister. I think we all need to sort of think about being very cautious about going into this year. You've seen the FTSE, not quite there. I'm not sure. Maybe tomorrow it could hit a high. I think the FTSE 250 is more relevant, and that's pretty high as well. But I don't think that's really giving us a true picture of the economy. If you think about, we've been printing money, inflation, interest rates are going up, the cost of debt's going up. Maybe people borrowed to afford Christmas. They've got to repay that loan at some point. I'm not convinced about how we even measure CPI and inflation itself. We don't even include the rising cost of rent. In the last change, they took out suits and put in vegan sausages. So it's quite arbitrary in terms of how they measure this. So I think you'll be very careful. I think that we're in for either looking at going to recession this year or bouncing around it.
So clearly, buckle up is your advice. However, the bigger picture is looking a little rosier, isn't it? With inflation set to come down, the global cost of energy is dipping as well as countries seek an alternative to Putin's oil and gas. And, of course, unemployment still reassuringly low too. So in time, we will recover, won't we?
Yeah, I mean, these things are cyclical, aren't they? So it's going to be a difficult period of time, and then you come out of it. And the key is to, be there and to survive and then thrive. And I don't just mean individual businesses. I'm very focused on small businesses, but I mean the economy as a whole. So you're right. The British economy, Britain itself, is in a very strong position. You saw, I think it was the PM saying that we should be the best place to start and operate a business. I completely believe in that. But I think you've got to be cautious about, running at it too hard. Inflation, hopefully, will get down to about 4%, I think the forecast is. Rising interest rates is a few tools we've got to actually make that happen. So I think you will see that happen. And things are getting better. If you're a consumer, you're going to see the energy price come down. If you're a small business, they've changed the cap. It's not quite as, it's more of a discount now. It's not as quite as helpful as it was. So there are a few cliff edges for small businesses. Don't forget there's 5.5 million of them employing 13 million people. So that flows through the economy. So I agree with you. There's light at the end of the tunnel. But I think the end of the tunnel is a little bit further away than we expect.
We're hearing that, Piers, there are many Tory backbenchers who are pressurising the Prime Minister into cutting taxes, given the fact that with that surprise news of growth, albeit pretty modest in November of last year, that he's got enough money with which to cut taxes and stimulate growth. What's your view? Should the Chancellor and the Prime Minister cut taxes to make the country grow again?
That's very complicated, clearly. So I think it's a bit early. I mean, a lot of it's ideological, isn't it, about cutting taxes? So I'm a big believer in that, taxes should be, minimum, especially if you're looking at, growth, but the bottom line, you want as much to flow through to the bottom line that can be reinvested in businesses. I think it's too early, Mark, to start thinking about, cutting taxes. Let's see how the economy pans out. Let's see where we end up with, the various disputes about pay, how that might flow through to inflation, because that can have a marked impact, where interest is going to go. So I think it's how we're going to deal with the debt burden that we've sort of accumulated through COVID. The impact of Brexit as well, there still is one. We've not quite got to the bottom of that yet. So it's too early to start making these big changes. We saw, the Liz Truss try, and we saw how the markets reacted to that. So we should be careful, Mark.
Of course, you're a successful entrepreneur. You employ plenty of talented people. Do you think that unemployment will stay low? Because that's normally what happens when there's a recession. You get high unemployment. That's been the only positive of the economic outlook over the last 12 months.
Well, we're seeing it kind of turn around. You saw the Great Resignation. There are now more vacancies and there are people looking for work. So that we're in it. I don't quite fully understand it, how that actually computes. A lot of employers are struggling hiring people that used to be able to employ, you know, from Europe. You can still do it, okay, that's fair, let's face it, but it's more complicated than it was. There's more paperwork. So I think that we are in a good place in terms of unemployment, but the economy's changing, Mark. You know, we can't assume the world tomorrow is going to be looking like it was over the last, you know, even a decade. The world's changing very, very quickly. You see new technologies. I don't know if you had to play with a chat GPT. I was playing with that today. These technologies are going to change the need for lots of not just manual labour, but also sort of, you know, the labour, the brain labour, really. People who are working, it's not just taxi drivers, forklift truck drivers, administrators, it's lawyers, accountants, it's surgeons. So technology is going to change the world very quickly and a lot faster than we expect, and that's happening now.